You know what's wild? There are towns in the UK that simply don't exist anymore. Entire communities, streets, even schools, gone. Some vanished because of mining, some because of flooding, and a few were cleared for new developments. It's hard to imagine now, but these places once hummed with life. Families walking to shops, kids playing in the streets. And here's the thing. If you've ever wondered what life was like in those forgotten towns, or why we remember them at all, stick around. We're going to explore the stories, the people, and the moments that time nearly erased. Segment 1. Derwent, Derbyshire. Derwent sat quietly in the hills of Derbyshire, a village that felt like it had always been there. Small stone cottages lined narrow lanes, the church bell marking hours that seemed to stretch. Kids ran to the tiny village school, their shoes scuffing the flagstones, while neighbors leaned over fences, chatting about crops, weather, or last week's market. Honestly, life was simple, but full in ways you could only feel if you were there. Everything changed when Ladybower Reservoir plans moved forward in the 1940s. Surveyors arrived, measuring, marking, deciding which houses would stay and which would be flattened. Families packed what they could, sometimes leaving decades of belongings behind. Books, furniture, heirlooms. Some were angry, others resigned. By the time the water flowed into the valley, Derwent's streets, its school, even the churchyard were gone. You could still see remnants for years. A garden gate poked out of the water in dry summers. Roof lines would appear, then vanish again. People walked the valley and tried to imagine life as it had been. The market days, children shouting, neighbors calling across the lanes. The rhythm of everyday life stopped, completely. And yet, the stories, the memories, they lingered, stubborn as the stone walls once standing there. Segment 2. Capel Sellen, Wales. Capel Sellen was tucked into a narrow valley in North Wales, a village that seemed like it had grown out of the hills themselves. Everyone knew everyone else. Children walked to the little school together, and the chapel was more than a church. It was where neighbors sang, celebrated, and grumbled about the weather. Shepherds moved flocks along misty paths, dogs barking, and the air often smelled of wet earth and hay. You could almost hear the rhythm of life there in the soft footsteps along stone lanes. Then the 1960s brought disaster in slow motion. The Liverpool Corporation decided to flood the valley for a reservoir. There were protests, petitions, voices raised in anger, but the decision went through anyway. Homes were emptied, barns left to rot, gardens abandoned. Families carried what they could, but decades of memories couldn't fit into a cart. Even the chapel, once filled with laughter and hymns, was closed. Some of the old paths remain visible during dry spells, and people tell stories of glimpsing rooftops or walls beneath the water. I mean, can you imagine leaving everything behind and knowing it would never be the same? Sheep fields, children's hide-and-seek spots, a single lane connecting everyone. Gone. Capel Sellen didn't just disappear physically, it vanished as a living village, leaving behind only stories, memories, and occasional glimpses of what once was. Segment 3. Tintern, South Wales. Tintern was one of those valleys where the mine always seemed to be the heartbeat of the village. Men went down the shafts before dawn, lamps swinging, coal dust already settling on their jackets. Women worked at home or in small cottage gardens, baking bread, washing clothes in the river, keeping the household running while the men were underground. The children? They learned to make their own fun between the noise of carts and the distant clatter of the colliery. The chapel held everyone together. Sundays full of hymns and chatter. But during the week, the mine dictated everything. By the mid-20th century, coal demand fell. Mines closed. Families packed and left. And streets that had echoed with boots, laughter, and shouting became silent. Shops shut, the chapel emptied, and the rhythm of daily life, shoveling coal, walking to school, neighbors checking in on each other, stopped. It wasn't dramatic, it just ended. One day the town felt alive, the next, quiet, almost abandoned. Even small details stick in memory. A broken pickaxe leaning against a fence, a coal stove long cold, the blackened walls of the old workshop. Those who left carried these images with them. Life in Tintern wasn't fancy or remarkable, but it was real, grounded in work, routine, and community. And when it faded, it left a very human void, the kind that photographs and stories can only hint at. Segment 4. Clopton, Northamptonshire. Clopton was one of those villages where life moved at a quiet, measured pace. Bakers fired brick ovens in the mornings, filling the air with warm bread smells, while the blacksmith pounded iron in his workshop, sparks flying. Kids chased one another along the narrow lanes, ducking around carts and hedges, and the village green hosted fairs where the whole community gathered. Everything felt connected. Small shops, cottages, the church at the corner. And it had a rhythm that outsiders might not notice, but everyone inside felt. Then came the motorway plans in the 1960s. Surveyors arrived, marking the houses, shops, and workshops that would be removed to make way for the road. Families packed up, sometimes leaving years of belongings behind. The village green, once bustling with laughter and games, was flattened. Even the pub, which had been the center of countless stories and conversations, was torn down. Within months, the streets were empty, and the familiar patterns of daily life were gone. It's strange to think about. Where children ran, neighbors exchanged news, and bakers' ovens glowed. Now there's asphalt and traffic. And yet, the memory of Clopton lingers. People talk about it. Photos survive. And occasionally, someone driving past might glimpse the outline of a lane that once held the heartbeat of a village. Life doesn't always disappear quietly, but Clopton shows how quickly a place can be erased, even when it felt permanent. Segment 5. Fairmile Head, Northumberland. Fairmile Head was a tiny village, surrounded by open fields and rolling hills, where life revolved around farming and local routines. Mornings were filled with the sound of carts rattling along dirt lanes, cows lowing in the pastures, and children helping with chores before heading to the little village school. The post office doubled as a community hub. People stopped in for letters, gossip, and a quick chat while picking up daily essentials. Even small features, a stone bridge over a stream, an old oak by the churchyard, marked the rhythm of life in the village. By the 1930s, plans for a reservoir meant the valley would be flooded. Families were given notice to leave, cottages were abandoned or demolished, and fields left untended. Livestock was relocated, daily routines disrupted, and even small details like the well-used stone fence along the main lane were lost underwater. Life that had felt ordinary suddenly vanished. Walking through what remains today, it's easy to imagine the past. Children racing along lanes, neighbors exchanging news, the smell of baking bread and fresh earth. But it's gone now, replaced by water, overgrown paths, and faint memories. Fairmile Head's story is one of quiet disappearance, the kind that leaves physical traces submerged, but leaves the life and routines of its people alive in memory. Segment 6. Coimbran, South Wales. Before the industrial plans, Coimbran wasn't a town at all, just a collection of small villages surrounded by fields and woodland. Life revolved around local trades, wheelwrights fixing carts, millers grinding grain, and families running tiny shops selling everything from tools to cloth. Children ran along narrow paths between cottages, and on Sundays, everyone gathered at the chapel or village hall, sharing stories, news, and a laugh. It felt quiet, steady, and human, in a way that's easy to miss when you're not there. Then came the new town designation in the mid-20th century. The plan was ambitious: factories, housing developments, wide roads. Entire villages had to be cleared. Homes were demolished, gardens plowed under, and the familiar paths children ran on were replaced with concrete. Families were relocated, some nearby, others farther away. The rhythms of daily life, the clatter of carts, children playing in lanes, neighbors exchanging greetings, disappeared almost overnight. Even tiny details vanished: the old mill, the smithy, stone fences, and the little footpath beside the stream. And yet, people carried these memories with them. The smell of fresh baked bread, the sound of a hammer on iron, the chatter of children racing each other home. It's the kind of human memory that photographs can't fully capture. A village alive in memory even after it's gone. Segment 7. Capel Gron. Wales. Capel Gron was a small village nestled along a winding valley. Cottages clustered around a single lane, with a tiny chapel at its heart. Farmers worked the hillsides, tending sheep and crops, while children ran between cottages, inventing games with whatever they could find. Neighbors shared tools, swapped stories, and helped each other with chores. It was simple, ordinary, and yet deeply connected. By the late 20th century, economic decline and reservoir expansion forced residents to leave. Homes were abandoned, fields left untended, and the chapel closed its doors. The rhythm of everyday life, morning chores, school walks, evening gatherings, vanished. Children's laughter, the bleating of sheep, and the clatter of carts slowly disappeared, leaving behind empty paths and overgrown gardens. Even the smallest details mattered: the wooden gate by a cottage, the stone steps of the chapel, the narrow footpaths leading to pastures. Families carried these images with them, memories of birthdays, harvests, and ordinary conversations. And today, the valley is quiet, sometimes revealing glimpses of rooftops or fences during droughts. Capel Gron's story is a reminder that a village can vanish physically, yet its memory, routines, and spirit survive in the lives of those who once called it home.